Marcus Freeman and his staff have been working extremely hard throughout the past month in the recruiting trail, and now it looks like their hard work is about to pay off in the form of commitments from some of their top prospects. All that more on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Irish. This is your daily Notre Dame podcast, and today is Thursday, June 20th, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I really appreciate everyone who tuned in today. If you're watching along on YouTube, please like the video below by giving this a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe. Today, we have got a lot of recruiting content coming your way. In just a moment here, I'm going to be joined by recruiting analyst Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated to recap everything that went down over the past month. Notre Dame has hosted dozens of official visits, and they've made some serious headway with some of their top prospects. We cover all of that with Eric. Enjoy. All right, I'm here once again with Eric Thomas, recruiting analyst for Irish Illustrated. And Eric, it has been a very busy month for Notre Dame and the staff as they have hosted dozens of official visits. And really, I just want to ask you, what do you think are the most important developments so far for Notre Dame after this month?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me back. It's always great to be here. Coming out of, this weekend's visits, I think there's a couple sort of key categories we can break it down to. So I'll go by sort of the weekends here. Within your first major weekend, you obviously had three uncommitted prospects: Jameer Joseph, Madden Faremo, and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. Jameer Joseph has since committed to Penn State, so obviously no developments for the Irish on that front. However, Madden Faremo does seem to be trending towards Notre Dame. We haven't seen confirmation of a canceled Texas visit from him yet. We have been monitoring for that. It may happen, it may not, but that is something that we're kind of keeping an eye on. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng is interesting. Ohio State actually canceled Madden Faremo's visit because they wanted to focus more on outside linebacker prospects who they felt that they were in the race for. They felt that they were running probably third or fourth in Madden Faremo's effort. He's more of an inside linebacker anyway, so ultimately they felt that the effort required to get him to seriously consider Ohio State probably the juice wasn't worth the squeeze for what they were looking for, not that he's not a good player. That moved them to Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. However, a lot of the reporting coming out of the Ohio State side is that following his visit, it doesn't seem like there was a ton of momentum there. It doesn't seem like there was maybe the full buy-in because Ohio State does look at him as sort of linebacker target 2 right now. I believe they're targeting a 5-star in-state, if I recall correctly. So Notre Dame's pretty well positioned to land 2 linebackers that I think coming into the month, we really looked at it as they'll probably grab one of the 2. And that's a pretty significant update for them. Kind of moving it to the midweek visit, that was Dylan Robinson, John Anthony Hall, and then Jadon Blair. Obviously, Blair has been an interesting one. We've reported extensively on him over at Irish Illustrated. I know that from all the reporting we've done, it does seem like Notre Dame was sort of in the driver's seat coming into his official visits, but he was dutifully looking to take these visits as a fact-finding operation. And when you structure your visit outlook like that, ultimately what that means is you're looking for the door to remain open until you're ready to make a decision, which is a little bit more of an intent to make sure that all aspects are considered. So with that understood, Notre Dame really had to leave a strong impression with other people getting visits after them, especially Penn State. Sounds like that visit went about as well as it could have. I think the Irish are in very good position there. Frankly, I talked with Kevin Sinclair about this. I think both of us are pretty close to putting in a crystal ball for that one. We're just really sort of keen to hear how the Penn State visit goes and if there's any sort of momentum or excitement. I think if there's not a massive influx of Penn State support coming out of that weekend, it's going to be all Notre Dame. The wide receivers are interesting. I really do like John Anthony Hall personally. I think a lot of folks are probably more on the Dylan Robinson side for his size, but there wasn't buzz about a commitment for either one of them coming out of it. That's not surprising for Hall. I think for Robinson, that's indicative of the fact that UCLA is setting the tone here. And for Notre Dame to earn his pledge, UCLA probably has to drop the ball somewhat on this visit. As well as it went for Notre Dame. I'm not taking anything away from what they put there. UCLA is just very involved in this recruitment. They've been setting the pace for most of it. And frankly, that long-term value of relationship is tough to overcome as a late sell. And then you get to this final weekend here. Obviously, two uncommitted prospects, Derek Meadows and Tanuk Hines, and then committed with a little star on it, and Ivan Taylor. Ivan Taylor's tough, man. I'll start there. We talked about it. He's a committed prospect. So everything I say, I'll couch with the bar for what a successful visit is for a committed prospect who's wavering is higher. It just is. He's already pledged to your class. The bar is retaining him. It is a net sum game. So ultimately, if he's not retained, it's a loss. I think the weekend with him not canceling the Michigan visit and still expressing the interest in the Florida visit, which he might be on right now, I think that's a bit of a stalemate for the Irish on that front. I texted Kevin right afterwards. I think it's a loss until proven otherwise. But it's a little bit nerve-wracking. This is big boy recruiting, but the continued investment in future visits is definitely nerve-wracking. Tanuk Hines, I'm only hearing good things. I think Texas probably didn't make him enough of a priority early on to really be a factor unless they just absolutely, turn this thing on, and he already did his OB, so I don't know where that's going to come from. USC is the real contender here. Baylor, dark horse maybe, but USC really likes Hines. And then for Derek Meadows, look, the feedback coming out of the Notre Dame visit was not the same that it was Georgia and Michigan. He definitely had more excitement kind of in his tone coming out of Georgia and Michigan. They're also new. Notre Dame is a program that's been on him for a long time. He's been there, a ton of times over the last year. This is something where they were pitching, this is what you're familiar with, this is what you know, this is what we've shown you, so this is what you're getting into, versus, Georgia's brand new, it's shiny, it's exciting, it's the cool new offer from the Southeast he hasn't seen yet. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into some of the feedback from him. He plays his cards close to his vest, and we should have clarity coming out of his final visits more so than at any point, along the path.
Okay, wow. There was a ton of great stuff that I want to follow up on. But let's actually start with the first thing you said, because I think that's really important regarding the linebackers. Once Matt Framo left his visit from Notre Dame, you started to see some of the crystal balls go in for him to land with Notre Dame. And I saw a lot of momentum for Notre Dame to land Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, but still I was just like, he's going to Ohio State this upcoming weekend. Notre Dame has lost to Ohio State so many times in the recruiting trail. Now, they have won some, obviously, KVA being the most recent one, but I just didn't have a ton of high hopes. Right now, you feel like Notre Dame is in the lead, because I know that he's also considering Michigan and USC as well.
Yeah, I think at this point, Notre Dame is in the lead. That partially comes from his quote coming out of his visit, where he said the rest of his process at this point was basically to see if anyone could top Notre Dame. Especially for someone who already came out of their USC visit prior to that. I think that's a significant quote. Realistically, I think that Notre Dame is absolutely in the lead for him. I think Ohio State was probably the main fear for the Irish at that point. And it just doesn't sound like Ohio State is ready to fully jump in, commit, and make him a take right now when they feel like they might have a better option in state. And I believe it's an in-state prospect. I can verify that. But it's just a little bit of an odd situation where Notre Dame is very ready to, sign on the dotted line right now, let's go. And Ohio State's just not there.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me about Owusu-Boateng's visit was the fact that Notre Dame also got his brother, Jeremiah, to come on the official visit with him, which was obviously really cool. He's one of the best linebackers to come through Notre Dame in recent memory, as well as Jalen Smith, who's an all-time great. They were both there. They took that picture, the three of them together, and it was really cool. And I thought that the pitch from Notre Dame's side was great. Like, hey, you could be just like both of these guys. You already know how good your brother was. Here's Jalen Smith, too, and we see a lot of him in you. And it made me think about how Notre Dame treats committed guys versus uncommitted guys during these official visits, because Notre Dame hosted a ton of committed prospects over the course of the past month. Frankly, those aren't really going to catch like the big headlines in terms of recruiting coverage, because they're already committed to Notre Dame, unless it's like Ivan Taylor, who is openly wavering on said commitment. But from, talking to these guys, talking to their families, things like that, how does the staff go about treating committed guys versus uncommitted guys? Because you obviously want to prioritize the guys who are already in your class, but also you really need to close on the uncommitted guys to finish off this class.
Yeah, it's a cohesive effort, right? I think part of it is the engagement with the committed players and the showing them how much they matter independently. That is almost part of the sell for the uncommitted prospects, because a big theme that comes across from a lot of the players you talk about is, you hear things like, oh, the team's a family, we want to make a brotherhood all the time, but there's a difference between remarking that you feel that way and saying, oh, this is a brotherhood, and just kind of using that as a tagline, and making cognizant effort to connect everyone in that way. And Notre Dame does that. Something that came up I did an interview with Sharon Black, Will Black's mom. Something that came up there is Notre Dame has a team mom, like a hired team mom. It's Shannon Vincent, and she helps get all the families together. She helps organize like hotel booking, like hotel blocks and things like that. And they afford that resource to the families and the parents to get connected. Not only, meeting her at the official visit and having her give a presentation, but apparently she's at like all the practices, she's at all the games, she's, a very connected part. And that's just one example of a resource, but that's made available to committed and uncommitted prospects so that ultimately they can create that glue between them sort of organically on these visits. I think another big thing you saw, the photo shoots are crazy because they allow for some really organic moments to build that really can be kind of significant, even if they just look like they're hype and whatever else. Because look, that's not why anyone goes to these schools. It's not, there's like nothing of substance in the photo shoot. It's all flash and spectacle. And that's great. It's a cool part of the weekend. But when you see something like Derek Meadows rocking out on stage and flexing, and everyone in the room is chanting, "We want Meadows," the emotional impact of being in that room and being Derek Meadows, like, yeah, man, I'm Mr. 5-star. They're chanting my name. They want me to come to South Bend. I've been around here a bunch of times. This is home. I love all these guys. Let's do it. That's a very different sort of moment and environment to create for an uncommitted prospect. And it happened totally organically with the committed guys. So I think that crossover and engagement, like, yeah, you got it. Marcus Freeman's probably hanging around the Meadows table a little bit more than he was the night table and things like that. But ultimately, I think they do a really good job of almost delegating a lot of that responsibility to the kids and just basically creating the structure for these guys to create those connections and see if it's a fit.
That's really interesting to hear, and it makes sense and kind of represents a lot of what Notre Dame has been selling to these guys for a long time, the family aspect, the brotherhood aspect of it all, and it seems to be really working. Like, I definitely think it's strategic that Notre Dame tried to get Deuce Knight and Derek Meadows on the campus at the same time. And it sounds like, Deuce Knight, he's been very active in recruiting a bunch of these guys. And I'll hold off on asking more Deuce Knight stuff because I feel like we have talked about him extensively on this podcast. But we were talking about Derek Meadows, and I want to talk about Notre Dame's plan at wide receiver because right now they have two guys committed in the class in Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr. There's a chance that Jerome Bettis ends up switching over to the defensive side of the ball at some point in his career. Notre Dame hosted 4 wide receiver prospects over the course of the past 2 weeks. Derek Meadows is obviously the headliner. Fans really like Dylan Robinson. Tanuk Hines, I think, is a little bit underrated, and John Anthony Hall was a late offer as well. It seems like Derek Meadows could commit at any time, and Notre Dame is going to take him, right, because he's that good. The other guys, it does feel like it might be a who commits first type of deal because, like I said, they've already got 2 guys committed. What do you think is Notre Dame's plan at wide receiver in terms of the timelines for these individuals and who they want most of all?
Yeah, well, like you said, the list starts and ends with Meadows kind of at that top tier. For Notre Dame, looking at the projection for the roster beyond this season, there isn't a wide receiver projected to be on the roster who's taller than 6'2", I believe. So for a real boundary wide receiver to emerge in the class, which Derek Meadows is, I mean, he is a 6'5", massive guy, great leaping ability. He's obviously a track star. He presents a unique prospect for them in that he is developmental in his technical aspects, but he just can do enough things physically that he could be an instant impact at boundary for, moving the chains, red zone, deep threat, whatever you need to do for targeted packages. He's a major one. The question there is more like, is he really going to end up sticking with Notre Dame, who he's been on for this entire time, or is the excitement of that draw of the Southeast, that big-time football that he has seen dominate college football for pretty much his entire life, now that those offers are coming in, are they going to swing more? So it's interesting. It's a little bit of a curious situation, but right now everything we're hearing is Notre Dame feels very good about where they're at, and there's no reason they shouldn't. Beyond that, I think you're right. Timing matters. I sort of, in the vein of timing matters, it was not a coincidence that Sean Terry's decommitment was, sort of immediately preceded by the John Anthony Hall offer and the official visit. I think we expected to hear really good things coming out of that visit. We heard some very positive things from him, but ultimately he is someone who is not going to signal what he's thinking or what he's doing until the announcement comes. He won't name finalists. He's just not really that kid. He's not in it for the, the hype of, oh, he's got these top schools. Everyone show him some love. That's not who he is. He's a three-sport athlete. He is a very explosive player, more quick than fast. I think Notre Dame ideally would like to have him and Meadows in the class together, and then ultimately they would probably like to add Hines in there. It's not that I don't like Dylan Robinson, but I think Dylan Robinson's a better safety prospect than a wide receiver prospect. So I think that UCLA and Washington probably have the inside track there. It's not that he's a bad receiver. I just think he's a really good safety. So, for Notre Dame, I think they probably have a little bit of like an outside looking in element on that, but it's a little bit difficult to know how much that actually impacts it, because everything we're hearing is that the Notre Dame visit blew him away. He kind of blew Notre Dame away, like, oh, okay, we like him more than we thought. And now it's really just what happens at UCLA.
Yeah, the Dylan Robinson thing is interesting because he's listed as a wide receiver on the site, but it seems like a lot of other teams agree with you that he is more suited to play safety at the college level. But Notre Dame sees it more as a deep threat. So maybe, it just kind of comes down to Dylan's decision. What does he want to play? And I think that's going to go a long way in determining where he goes to school. We'll be right back with Eric to hear his thoughts about where things stand between Ivan Taylor and Notre Dame, but I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether in a speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Okay, let's talk about John Anthony Hall, because the last time I had you on, we talked about him briefly. You said you like him a little bit more than most. I think of maybe any player in this class, his recruiting ranking, it's all over the map, man. 24/7 has him just outside the top 50. Other recruiting sites don't even have him in the top 300. So let's start off with this question. One, why do you like him more than most?
Yeah, look, big measurables is always great, but like ultimately, if I have to boil down like what I like in a receiver coming into college, if he's a guy that has elements of explosive athleticism and just gets open, runs good routes and gets open, my guy, love it. Getting open is the best friend for any quarterback, and he is able to do it not only with technical wins throughout his route running, but he's also just so explosive. His feet are quick in short spaces, and coming out of his breaks, he's just able to get that edge of speed and acceleration over most guys. Even that, if his top speed isn't the best and corners can probably get some catch-up speed on him down the field or whatever, I still really like what he brings to the offense. And specifically, I like how he fits in the class for his ability to be used to attack the intermediate area of the field when compared to some of the skill sets that you see otherwise. Like Tanu Hines has that deep threat and screen ability. Derek Meadows is like a chain mover, and he has some of that deep threat and with room to grow, obviously. John Anthony Hall is really unique in that he and Elijah Burris are like intermediate threats. And those are the types of receivers that I think the skill set is almost not as prized because it's not as exciting on tape as some of these other guys who, rip off 97-yard screens for touchdowns and stuff, but it's essential. It is essential to the core functionality of an offense that's going to pass as much as the Denver offense is. So I just really like what he brings specifically to Notre Dame from his athletic background and how he plays the game.
What are the red flags? Why do you think that Notre Dame offered him so late, and why are other recruiting sites not quite as sold on him?
Yeah, he doesn't have elite top-end speed. I'll be the first to tell you that. I think that when you look at players in his mold who are three-sport athletes, coaches always love that stuff, but there is an element of like they don't just focus on one thing. So you begin to wonder, one, are we seeing kind of the maximum that they're going to be able to put out as an athlete, or when they focus, are they going to take that step forward? Because that's not always a guarantee. It's traditional thought as you think it would, but sometimes guys are just maxed out. And I think some of the questions were about that. And then, frankly, guys in Indiana, competition level can be a little bit lower. I don't think that's necessarily the case for him, but in the national sense and the ranking sense, it can be a little bit harder to find those guys, especially if, he goes up against 3 or 4 D1 caliber corners his entire year versus a wide receiver exactly the same sort of, builds, play style in Georgia, who played against a 5-star every other week. It's just a little bit different in terms of the exposure. So I think part of the late rise is probably just that it took people a little bit longer to recognize, like, okay, this probably translates. And some of that is, the other accolades. He's an all-star in basketball. He's a state champion in track. That stuff eventually adds up to profile.
Let's talk about Ivan Taylor. We've discussed him a little bit on this podcast already. Obviously, there's a lot of concern among the Notre Dame fan base about whether or not he is going to decommit. And, it seems like Notre Dame did all the right things on that visit, right off his visit to Alabama. Just to get a sense of the timeline of this whole thing, when did you first hear that Ivan Taylor was going to take official visits? Because it really caught me off guard. I think your colleague Kevin Sinclair broke the news officially that Ivan was going to take that visit to Alabama. And ever since then, there's plenty of red flags about Notre Dame's position with him, even though it seemed like the visit went really well. So when did you start to hear about this?
Yeah. Well, I heard about his official visit to Alabama on Friday when he was there. That's when I got a text from Sinclair, like, oh, guess what's happening? Oh, no. Okay. But I think the turbulence really began when Chris O'Leary left for the Chargers. Chris O'Leary was a major force in his recruitment. They're a good pair. From what I've gathered, Ivan Taylor is devoutly religious. He's very much so someone who wants to lead through action and not necessarily the most vocal guy. And that's Chris O'Leary to a T. He's one of the hardest workers I ever engaged with at Notre Dame. So that loss was big. He came for the spring game. Folks kind of thought it was settled out. It seemed like it was in place. And then, boom, Friday comes. It's nerve-wracking, man. It came out of nowhere. I have been, working to confirm exactly when the coaches found out. We haven't gotten that date yet, so I am interested to find that out, just from like a perspective and communication thing. It does sound like he gave them advance notice, which is always a plus. I go back and forth on this because on the one hand, this is big boy recruiting. Like, this is what's going to happen. Guys are going to take visits and they're going to have questions and things are going to drag out in a very uncomfortable and public way. On the other hand, there's something a little bit different about, hey, I have questions. I'm going to take my visits. I'm going to end it with a visit to Notre Dame and we're going to see where we stand. And I'm going to throw you in the middle of all this. We're going to schedule this as we can. And I'm just going to get my questions answered. I think the intentionality here is a little bit more, I want to keep the door open than I just have questions that existed and, we'll see where they lead. That's a little troubling. Hopefully Notre Dame did well enough to kind of change some of the thought process and the intentionality in the visit to Michigan and ultimately to Florida. But look, man, if he keeps scheduling visits elsewhere, it's going to look real doubtful that he ends up in South Bend.
Yeah, that's exactly how I looked at it. I was like, okay, took the visit to Alabama. He's coming to Notre Dame this weekend. If he cancels all of his visits after that, if he doesn't go to Michigan, if he doesn't go to Florida, then yeah, he's a committed prospect. And then it sounds like you're right. He might be at Michigan right now as we speak. So I look at him as an uncommitted prospect. Fans might be upset about that, but I just think that's the way it is. That doesn't mean that Notre Dame is out of it, but they're going to have to fight for this one. And I've seen some comparisons with Peyton Bowen, and I understand the fact that he's a very highly rated safety. So in that respect, and there's a chance that Ivan Taylor could flip just like Peyton Bowen did. But in the way that these two have handled the situation, it really couldn't be more opposite, right? Like Peyton Bowen was taking unofficial visit, and if you're listening to the podcast and putting that in air quotes, to Texas A&M or Oklahoma literally every weekend. He was wearing Oregon gear at his high school games. He made it a very public thing, where it seems like with Ivan, he's keeping things really close to him and his family. So it's difficult to get a read, but I do get the sense that he is probably going to decommit at some point. Maybe Notre Dame ends up with him, maybe they don't. But to me, that makes the recruitment of Jaden Blair all that more important. Do you think that in light of this news with Ivan Taylor, the staff has adjusted their strategy a little bit with Blair? Because before I used to see his potential commitment as a luxury. Now it's a necessity.
Yeah. I think the privilege of being on Blair for as long as they have is that they don't have to adjust the strategy. Ultimately, Notre Dame put themselves in a prime pole position, or provisional pole position, I should say, for Jaden Blair before any of this news broke. And they really just had to seal the deal. I think that Jaden Blair committing to Notre Dame would be independent of what Ivan Taylor does. I've seen some speculation that perhaps Notre Dame's incredibly aggressive pursuit of Blair following O'Leary's departure could be part of the Taylor math. I don't see that. Frankly, they're different enough players in what they do well that I don't think that would be a reasonable way to look at it, especially given the open competition at safety next year with only 3 upperclassmen. So I really think that Notre Dame's in a good spot with Blair on their own merit, and they're in a lucky position where if something like this happens, guess what? They have probably the best backup option they could have in the country. So
yeah. It's certainly a good alternative. If Notre Dame loses Taylor, they end up with Blair. It would still sting, knowing that they could potentially have both those guys, but still, they're in pretty good shape overall. Okay,
yeah.
Last question. It's really multiple questions, so I shouldn't really just say one. I want to get your predictions on some guys. I actually did this myself. I think it was 2 episodes ago, so you and I are in this together. And again, we could look back on these predictions months from now. I'm just going to give you a name and rapid fire. You tell me initial instinct. Where do you think that they're going to end up? You don't have too much time to think about this. You're going to have a shot clock. We're going to go through some guys here, and then we'll wrap things up. All right?
Sure.
Deuce Knight.
Notre Dame.
Derek Meadows.
Notre Dame.
Okay, that was like a painful Notre Dame, but I guess you'll have to take that one there. Dylan Robinson.
UCLA.
Tanuk Hines.
Optimistic Notre Dame.
John Anthony Hall.
I would have said Notre Dame for sure a week ago. At this point, I think I'm kind of caught between maybe Notre Dame and Stanford. It could be Purdue too, but Stanford's just so good, man. They always lurk.
Quick follow-up. Is that more of a Notre Dame thing or a Stanford thing in the sense of like they're kind of taking their time with him while they wait for other guys?
I could be wrong here. This could be a mystery. I'll own that. I had a feeling that if it was going to be Notre Dame, it was going to go pretty quickly. Even if we didn't get all the hype, like I said, I thought we would get sense of an announcement impending kind of quickly. Maybe he's just going through his visits and it's got to be on his timeline and everything. I just thought if Notre Dame had really locked that in by now, it would have been locked in by now.
I agree. Back to the list. Matt Framo.
Notre Dame.
Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng.
I like the Irish there, but it feels like I'm really leaning into this best case scenario, and that scares me.
Okay. Jaden Blair.
Notre Dame.
Ivan Taylor. See, I'll cut you some slack with Ivan Taylor. It's hard to tell about the other options. We don't really know enough. We just know that he's looking at them.
Florida just has felt very omnipresent since O'Leary left. That look, Alabama's a big time program. Michigan's obviously a big time reigning champion program. Florida's just in his backyard, dude. It's so hard to beat that if he opens the door.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, I'll tell you who I picked. I took Deuce Knight to Notre Dame, Derek Meadows, Notre Dame, Dylan Robinson not at Notre Dame, Tanuk Hines. I also took John Anthony Hall to go with the Irish. Man Framo, Notre Dame. I did not say Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I said Ohio State for him, Jane Blair, Notre Dame, and I said Ivan Taylor was going to decommit, and I didn't really know where he was going to end up. So we're pretty aligned in this.
Yeah, Ivan Taylor does feel like if it's Notre Dame in the field, it feels more like a coin flip than a dice roll or a card draw, which is like very much so where you want to be if you're in a place of uncertainty. But it feels like the coin might be getting heavier on the tail side day over day, and I don't love that.
Yeah, and I think all in all, Notre Dame would end up, if they were to lose Taylor and then add the other 6 guys that we talked about and keep Deuce Knight, they'd be at 25 guys in the class, or actually 26 rather. Is that about what you expect they'll finish up with, unless there's like some late risers here at the end?
Yeah, realistically, given where they're at with their scholarship chart, I think that 25, 26 number is kind of the ideal spot. The only place I could see them really lunging for a late riser other than that would be at offensive tackle, just because the value is too good not to take at that position, and then at defensive tackle or at safety. Given the open competition, the need for veterans at safety, I think if they find someone they think is like, okay, this is a dude, that's someone that it's almost necessary for them to just have the bodies in the room. We talked about defensive tackle. If you can find a guy who meets the physical benchmarks that they look at, and ultimately they can look at them as, maybe it's a Bryce Young situation. Hey, last year you were 6'1", now you're 6'5". We really look at you a lot differently now. That's someone that I think they would go very, very aggressively for.
All right, man, this has been a ton of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this because I know it has been an extremely busy month for you as well as all of your colleagues over there at Irish Illustrated. So I appreciate it, man. We'll have to do it again soon.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate it. We'll hopefully get connected here, and we might be doing some spots in July on our side of things. So hopefully we'll see you then.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode, and that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'm going to be back next Tuesday of next week. As a reminder, during the months of June and July, I'm going to be on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday release schedule. Then once fall camp starts up at the beginning of August, we're going to be back to doing this every Monday through Friday, and we're going to be gearing up for the season. It's getting close. It's really getting close, and I appreciate everyone who has tuned in along the way throughout this offseason. We are getting closer to the start of the season, and I simply cannot wait. Before you go, this is your reminder to please subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you Tuesday.